Hi, can you hear me? I've got a lot of
Yeah.
interference, so hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. So today I've been asked to talk about transition. So I'll be looking at the end of employment, how best we can support staff as they move to their next chapter, and also support those that are left behind. And this picture is taken in 2016 when we had the international board meeting that took place in Peterborough. So that's outside of Peterborough Cathedral. Yeah, I think with Boomy we can see you on the picture actually. Okay, so England and Wales, we're a small team of 45 staff. We've got 38 office-based and 7 based in their home because they fundraise in a particular part of England and Wales, so they're based in their own region, and we have about 80 volunteers. Okay. So today I'm going to be talking, covering about the reasons why employment ends, our duty of care responsibilities, the importance of honouring and celebrating readjustment, and finally why this is also important. Okay. So there are many reasons why staff leave. Here are some examples. So it could be the relocation of a spouse's role, it could be retirement, family commitments, maybe taking a role overseas or wanting different hours. And sitting behind these, there can be a variety of drivers. So for example, the driver behind why an employee looked for a new role could be better pay and benefits. It could be a cultural reason, so feeling undervalued. They might not feel a good fit for the role or the organisation. It could be a relationships with colleagues. Another driver could be work-life balance. It could be lack of training or the opportunity for career progression. Okay, the next slide, thank you. So there are legal reasons why employment ends, and in the UK legislation, there are 2 main ways that the employment can end. So we've got resignation by the employee, which we've just looked at some examples of the reasons and the drivers behind those. And then we've got dismissal by the employer, which can come in many forms. So we've got conduct, which, for example, could be someone that was consistently late for work, or another example is bullying, showing bullying and aggressive behaviour. Then there's capability, so not being able to perform the role to the standard expected. Redundancy, when the job no longer exists. There are legal reasons why an employment might come to an end, and that might be in the case of somebody that's got a driving role, if they lose their driving license, or if they lose their right to work or stay in the country that they're employed. And finally, we have in our legislation something, in our legislation called some other substantial reason. And this is anything else which is deemed to be reasonable. So this could be the end of a fixed term contract. It could be a third party wishing that refuses to work with an employee, or an employee refusing to agree a new term of employment. Assuming all of these are deemed reasonable, then they would be fair reasons for dismissal. And sadly, there's also death in service, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later on. Okay, so if I could have the next slide, please. So resignation. When an employee resigns, what are the HR considerations? So once the resignation has been accepted by the line manager, it's an important early step is for HR to meet with the staff member to discuss their notice period, agree a leaving date, any annual leave they've accrued but not taken. And a plan needs to be agreed as to when and how best to communicate the news internally. HR should meet with the staff member regularly throughout the notice period. So touch points could be to include a time of reflection, otherwise known as an exit interview. It's not a term I particularly like, but that's what it's commonly known as. Another would be to discuss the return of equipment, another to ensure a handover plan, and finally, how they wish to celebrate their time at TLM. Along the way, another consideration is to how best you're going to communicate a staff member's leaving externally. So that in our case would be when they've got close relationships with fundraisers, supporters, is how we would actually tell our supporters that they're going to be leaving us. Then there are recruitment considerations. Are we looking to recruit exactly into the same role, or is this an opportunity to reshape the team? So the next steps are to agree a job description, a person spec, and an advert. In the UK, there's no legal retirement age anymore, so staff can choose when they would actually like to retire. So usually we get plenty of notice and are able to plan a retirement course for the staff member to help them with financial planning and a smooth transition to the next chapter. So as I mentioned earlier, having a time of reflection, the exit interview, this needs to be scheduled in and preferably with HR if that's possible. I try to mention that I'll be arranging this early on in the process, giving the staff member time to prepare for that. It's also an opportunity to ask about well-being and safeguarding. And at the end, I always ask permission what I can share with senior management for improvement purposes. And finally, their last day. This is a time to honour their TLM legacy, ensuring that it fits with what they want, and different staff members have different wants in terms of how they want. Some want to party and go out for a meal, and others want to just have something very quiet within their team. So often it involves preparing a few words and photos and refreshments of some kind. Okay, so the next slide is dismissal. So when an employee is dismissed by the organisation, what are the HR considerations now? So the slide looks almost identical to the previous slide. However, there are differences. So being a dismissal, usually HR have been involved in the lead up to the dismissal. However, that might not always be the case, especially if it's a summary dismissal, which is an immediate dismissal for gross misconduct. As before, it's important that HR speaks with the employee in respect of notice, leave, payroll, annual leave accrued but not taken. But I think here, confidentiality is really important, agreeing with the staff member what and when to communicate both internally and externally. And in respect of redundancy dismissals, HR will already have been involved in the consultation, but once a dismissal is confirmed, then in the UK, staff have the right to the time off for training and interviews. And HR might also want to consider the outplacement support that could be offered in terms of updating CVs and job search. So the time of reflection with the staff member is also equally important in a dismissal to learn more about their time at TLM and to check well-being and safeguarding. We also need to consider what learnings have come from the dismissal. So that might be looking at recruitment, the job role, the skills match, and the availability of management support for the individual. And finally, how best to honour their TLM legacy. And this can be very difficult depending on the circumstances of the dismissal. Okay, so the next one is, next slide please, is sadly, when an employee dies in service, so whilst employed, there are many things for HR to manage. And we've had two such circumstances at TLM England and Wales in the past 13 years. And sadly, I know many of you will have had such experiences more recently. So my learning has been that to have one person at TLM to be the point of contact with the family, as there will always be many messages from staff to pass on, and this needs to be coordinated so as not to bombard the family at this time. Assuming it is the wish of the family, another role is to coordinate which staff would like to attend the funeral. Wellbeing of staff is key, and when we lost our national director in 2010, one of our board members provided pastoral support to our team. It's also important for HR to find the right time to liaise with the family or the spouse as to the payroll, life assurance and pension monies. And consideration needs to be given to how best to honour their legacy, both with the staff and their family, and such as taking time to celebrate their life with pictures and memories. Okay, and the next slide, thank you. So in my experience in HR's role is to ensure that a smooth transition is achieved for both the staff member leaving and those left behind. So early HR intervention is important. In difficult circumstances, HR is often that neutral person to step in to coordinate the logistics of returning equipment, honouring the staff members' legacy, and ending well for all. There are many duty of care responsibilities to be considered, such as safeguarding, data, and continued inclusion. For example, that staff continue to attend training courses whilst working out their notice. Okay, and the next slide, please. So honouring and celebrating, this is key. It's important to get the content and timing of communication right, reducing difficult questions for employees to manage. Exit interviews, they don't need to be formal. Grabbing a coffee for a chat is usually far more insightful, and asking employees what you can share with senior management is very important. They should be a positive experience, even if circumstances are challenging. Celebrating their TLM legacy, which could be the service they've given, the skills that they brought to the organisation, their achievements, their pastoral support to other staff, their dependability and their loyalty. Photos and memory sharing are lovely ways to do this. And again, the hardest is a dismissal situation, and often staff want to leave quietly and don't want any future contact. It's so important for everyone that staff leaving are honoured and celebrated, and how this is handled forms part of the organisation's culture. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So readjustment. Confidentiality is always a challenge, especially with difficult departures. There can be sadness for those leaving TLM, both for long-serving and for short-serving staff. We said goodbye to a long-standing employee who retired last week, and although we celebrated with her, there was also great sadness, and we will miss her greatly. There can also be anxiety, especially amongst new staff when somebody leaves in the team under difficult circumstances. Not understanding the reasons from a confidentiality point of view, and not knowing the organisation well, being new to the organisation themselves, can lead to anxiety, then possibly thinking, what kind of organisation have I joined, and am I next? So all of this, the readjustment, we all need prayer and grace to help us through. Okay, and the last slide, ending well. Why is ending well so important? Well, it reflects the culture of the organisation, demonstrating that the care and well-being of staff is important, which will have an impact on staff engagement levels. And of course, we are a learning organisation and therefore should consider what we can continuously improve. And finally, having insight into how salaries and benefits compare with the market, both locally and within our sector, is of course very helpful as well. So that's all I have to say about transition. Thank you.